If you've ever wondered if you could have an unmedicated birth, you're considering a birth center, or you're just curious what a water birth is really like, you are in the right place. I recently gave birth to my second child at nearly 42 weeks, and ultimately this story is a testimony of God's faithfulness and His perfect timing. It was peaceful, powerful, and everything I hoped it would be. In this video, I'm sharing everything from the mental prep that helped me stay calm to the unexpected moment when we were almost transferred to the hospital. And trust me, there's one moment in this story that most people wouldn't talk about. But before we get there, we have to go back to the weeks leading up to the birth. Going past my due date was emotional, it was challenging, and honestly, it's a huge part of this story. I had completely convinced myself that I wasn't going to go past my due date. I thought this baby was going to be born early, so it was an emotional roller coaster with every day that passed. I was going out and about, and I was still working, so having to talk with people and them asking me, "When are you due?" and say, "I'm 3 days late, I'm a week late, I'm 10 days late, past my due date." It was just a lot dealing with all the opinions, people sharing stories of, "Oh, well, this is what sent my mom into labor, you should try that," or asking, "When are you going to get induced?" Because I think it's very uncommon in this day and age to go past your due date. I think most people get induced at 39 weeks. So it was a foreign concept to most people that I talked to. And on top of that, I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I was having a hard time trusting my body, trusting the process, and knowing that baby would come when they were ready. And once I went past my due date, I was having appointments with the midwives twice a week. They were doing non-stress tests and ultrasounds to check the amniotic fluid to make sure baby was happy and healthy. They were super supportive and relaxed, but we did start having those conversations about when we were going to start natural induction methods. And this is where my doula was also really supportive, because we would talk before and after each of the appointments. I would lay out what the midwife's plan was, and she would just check in with me and say, like, "How do you feel about that? Are you good with that? What's your plan?" And so that was really comforting. I was trying all of the things to induce labor naturally. I was eating pineapple, drinking red raspberry leaf tea, eating dates, harvesting colostrum. And then I ultimately had a membrane sweep at 41 and 3, so about 3 days before I went into labor. And I also did the castor oil, but more on that later. There was a pivotal moment that week. I had just dropped my son off at school, and I decided to go out to the beach for a little while on my way home to keep working. And I went out there and I just let the waves wash over my feet, and I was listening to worship music. And God was just so clearly speaking to me through the songs that I was listening to and reminding me to trust Him, that His way is better, His timing is perfect. And I could tell that He was encouraging me that this was going to happen, and just to trust Him through that process. But it was hard because I didn't know what it looked like. I didn't know when it was going to happen, and there was nothing else that I could do at this point besides resting in Him and trusting Him. So if you are near or past your due date, I really just want to encourage you to remember that it's more of a guest date. Trust the process. Know that you are not late. Your baby is not late. They will come when they are ready. And just to remember that with any of these natural induction methods, they can be helpful, but they're not going to ultimately work unless your body is ready. All right, so I had the membrane sweep on Thursday. I tried the castor oil Friday morning. It was with the nut butter, the apricot juice, the champagne. It was all mixed together, and it was disgusting. So I drank half of it. I ended up getting sick, and then about 10 minutes later I was able to get the second half down, but it didn't do anything on Friday. Early Saturday morning I started having contractions. I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning, and they were about 15 to 30 minutes apart. They were enough to wake me up. I wasn't able to sleep through them, and I was having to vocalize and moan through them. They stopped around 7 a.m., which was pretty discouraging. So at that point, I got up that morning, went for a walk. I tried the castor oil again on Saturday morning. And then my mom and I went to Costco to do some grocery shopping, and I just broke down in the aisle at Costco. I was crying. At this point, I was 41 and 6. It was the last day that I could potentially give birth at the birth center. Due to state regulations, they're not allowed to deliver babies at 42 weeks or beyond. So I just remember thinking, I want this so badly, but there was nothing I could do to make it happen, and just feeling like the clock was ticking. So we came home. I needed to relax, so I took a shower, and then I got in the bath for a little while, and I decided to do the mile circuit. And it was during the second phase of the mile circuit that I started having contractions. This was right around 5 o'clock, and they were about 5 minutes apart. I wasn't timing them on the app, but I just kind of kept looking at my phone whenever the next one started. And then during the third phase of the mile circuit, I was doing a kneeling lunge, leaned up against my bed, and my water broke. Initially it felt like I peed myself. I went up and I went to the bathroom and I peed. And when I stood up and it kept trickling, I realized that was my water breaking. So I called the midwife, and we agreed to meet at the birth center in about 45 minutes. I called the doula, and she started heading that way as well. And then we started packing our bags. I called my parents, and they came to pick up our older son. And at this point, the contractions were still about 5 minutes apart. It felt like they were back to back. They were pretty intense. I was having to stop and do like a low, deep moan through them. And so we had packed our bags. We were ready to walk out the door. And my husband decides at this point he needs to trim his beard. So I'm standing in the kitchen, and I am so concerned that I'm going to have this baby right then and there. But we get everything together, get in the car, start heading to the birth center. It was about a 15-minute drive to the birth center. It was pretty uncomfortable. Contractions kept up. I think one of my biggest fears was labor stalling, either in the car or once we got to the birth center, but it was quick. It just kind of picked up, and it kept going from there. So we met the doula met us in the parking lot at the birth center. We walk in together. I'm having to stop at the car, and then again in the elevator. Every time I have a contraction, I stop. She's giving me hip squeezes, which were so helpful. So we get into the birthing suite. We start to get settled. At this point, I'm still having contractions. It was most comfortable for me to stand up and kind of lean against the counter to get through the contractions. And the midwife started using the Doppler to monitor the baby. And after the first few, she mentions that baby's heart rate was dipping with each contraction. And so I laid down on the bed, and that wasn't comfortable. So I tried getting on all fours, and that was uncomfortable either. And she mentions that baby's heart rate kept dipping. So we both agreed that we needed to try something else. At this point, she wanted to do a cervical exam to see how far along I was, because she mentioned that the heart rate could be dipping because baby was descending quickly. She asked me if I wanted to know. I didn't want a chance being discouraged or feeling like I should be further along than I was. So she told the doula, and then later on I found out at this point I was 90% effaced, 7 centimeters dilated, and a +2 station. So I was making great progress. I could tell she was concerned about baby's heart rate. She was serious, but she was still calm. And she mentioned that if it continued, we would have to be transferred to the hospital. But she was also worried that we wouldn't make it to the hospital before this baby was born. So she kind of joked and was saying things like, if you want to just hurry up and have this baby so I don't have to keep worrying about his heart rate, that would be great. And I couldn't get in the tub at this point because the heart rate was dropping, so they suggested that I get in the shower. And I labored in the shower for a while. The contractions were so intense while I was in the shower. I think looking back, I was definitely in transition at this point. I was just having to use a lot of those breathing techniques, hip squeezes, those low, deep moans or vocalizing to get through those. And then while I'm in the shower, I'm surrounded by, there's 5 other people in this bathroom with me. It's my doula, the midwife, the student midwife, my husband, and the nurse. And think most people know it's not uncommon to poop while you are delivering a baby, but the castor oil can cause GI issues. And so I started having diarrhea in the shower, and there was no way that I could make it to the toilet. It was humiliating. It was so humbling. And I knew in that moment, there's no way I'm hiding this. I have to vocally recognize what is happening. But everybody was so supportive initially. They were like, no, it's the pressure that you're feeling. And I was like, no, it is not just the pressure that I'm feeling. But they were making jokes like, better here than in the tub. And my doula quickly grabbed some essential oils. So we made light of the situation, and just, it is what it is. But all that to say, if you're considering the castor oil, definitely make sure that you're talking with your care team and that they're on board with it, because it can, like I said, cause GI issues, and there is the risk of dehydration as well. But it is effective. So the midwife kept monitoring the heart rate while I was laboring in the shower, and I had 2 contractions back to back where the heart rate was good and it didn't dip. So she mentioned I could move to the tub. And so between contractions, I started making my way there. At this point, I was feeling a ton of pressure, and I was more aware of the different stages of labor and encouraged that I could tell things were progressing more so than I was with my first child when I was in labor with him. Once I got in the tub and got settled, everything felt great. The water was so comforting, and it definitely took the edge off with the contractions. At this point, I started having a little bit more of a gap between the contractions. I had heard somewhere that once your body gets to 10 centimeters, it will naturally give you a little bit of a break to regain some of that energy before the next phase where you have to start pushing. And I definitely think that's what was happening in this moment. I was also feeling more of a natural urge to push during the contractions with this delivery compared to my first birth, where once I got to 10 centimeters, they were kind of coaching me to start pushing, and I was pushing for about 20 or 30 minutes straight. I was exhausted, and it felt very defeating at that point. So this was completely different in the sense that I understood that I had to work with my body and with the contractions and use those to help me progress and help get baby down and out. I remember at one point I reached down and I could feel the head, and it was amazing. That was what I needed to keep going, and I knew that we were so close. At this point, I'm completely surrounded by my care team. My husband is right there by my side and encouraging me and saying, "You're doing great, babe, you've got this." The doula is there, and the midwives are also there encouraging me. It was just such a supportive environment. It was so special. So with the next couple of contractions, I was really focused on pushing, and baby's head came out and the contraction kind of stopped, and it felt so great. And the midwife was really supportive and just encouraging me that baby's okay, we can stay here, we can wait for the next contraction. And because it was a water birth, there was no concern, like baby, we weren't concerned about baby ingesting or kind of breathing in water, because their body still thinks they're in the amniotic fluid, so there's no reflex that's causing them to take that first breath yet. So we waited, the next contraction came on. At that point I was able to deliver the baby, pull him up and out of the water. The midwife quickly noticed that the cord was wrapped around his neck like a scarf, and so she undid that, and then I was able to bring him to my chest, and it was just such a really cool experience and an amazing feeling. There's that rush of hormones right after you deliver the baby. There's just no feeling like it. I just remember feeling so powerful. I mean, glad that I made it through, that it was over, that baby was here, but just feeling so calm and just happy and realizing that I got the water birth, everything went well. I'm just kind of taking it all in. It was amazing. And we had waited to find out the gender of this baby. So at this point, my husband came around and took a quick peek and announced, "It's a boy." So it was so fun. Everybody was so excited. And the lights in the tub when we got there were blue. So it was really cool the way everything worked out. I definitely recommend if you are on the fence about finding out the gender. I love surprises, and that was one of the best surprises, and it was just so fun. I had convinced myself, especially as I went past my due date, that this was a girl, and she was stubborn. So it was, I was in shock for the first couple of minutes, but just ultimately so excited that we have 2 boys and that I am a boy mom again. So after about 10 minutes, they helped me get out of the tub. We start making our way to the bed where we're just soaking up those snuggles. They are doing all the routine checks on baby while he's on my chest. We're doing skin to skin, and then nursing and latching for the first time. And then about 25 minutes after the birth, they encouraged me that it's time to start delivering the placenta, asked me if I have any urge to push yet, and I didn't. So they told me to stand up and allow gravity, to work with gravity to see if that helped. I stood there for a few minutes and wasn't feeling the urge to push yet. So they had this little metal frame kind of stool thing that they put a pool noodle on, and I sat down, and that allowed the pelvic floor to relax, and I was able to deliver the placenta that way. I'm just amazed, but with both births, I'm just amazed by the placenta. I think it's the coolest thing. The midwife was showing me the different parts of the placenta, what side was attached to me, which side was attached, where the cord was coming out for my son, and it actually had the amniotic sac still as part of it, so it was really cool to see all of that. And then I got back in bed, and that's when Dad got to cut the cord. That's always a really cool experience too. And then the midwife was checking me for everything down there, and that's when she had mentioned that I had a 2nd-degree tear, so she was stitching that up. The biggest thing that stuck out to me was how calm this environment was compared to my first birth. I also had a 2nd-degree tear, but it was very rushed, and they wanted to cut the cord a little bit earlier than I had hoped for. They were in a hurry to get the placenta out so that she could stitch me up, whereas this was, 30 minutes had gone by before she even checked to see if I had torn. After all of that, things started to wind down. The nurse stayed with us for several hours, and we ordered Five Guys. That's kind of a tradition at this point. We did that with my first as well. There's something about a big hamburger right after you've given birth. It tasted so good. We got to FaceTime with our family and introduce our older son to his brother, and share the gender with our parents as well, and that was just so sweet. And then a few hours later, it was time to go home. They got the blood work back to make sure everything looked good with baby. They went over the discharge paperwork and instructions and everything like that, and we left it was a little after midnight at this point. So we were there for about 6 hours total. About 5 hours after baby was born, we headed home. It was a little bit crazy heading home that quickly after having a baby compared to staying in the hospital for a couple of days, but I definitely felt more comfortable with this being our second. And overall, I absolutely loved the experience at the birth center. The care team was amazing. I really enjoyed the water birth, and I was just so grateful that I was able to have that experience and that everything worked out. So if you're considering an unmedicated birth, I just want to encourage you that you can absolutely do it. You are stronger than you think. Your body was designed to do this, and it is just such an amazing experience. You need to have a plan, but you also obviously need to be flexible because things don't always go according to plan, and things can, you have to pivot quickly sometimes during birth. And even in those moments, or if that happens and your birth plan doesn't go exactly how you want it to, just knowing that God is there, He is good, and sometimes things happen for a reason, and we don't always get to understand why. It's also really important to find a care team that supports you and that aligns with your values. I cannot recommend enough hiring a doula. It made such a difference. I think the biggest thing was she was able to proactively kind of set up the environment, make it comfortable, and do some of those comfort measures without me having to even ask for them. So dimming the lights, turning on my worship music playlist, doing hip squeezes. She had little candles. She had a little portable massager that she did on my low back that felt really good, and just being able to focus on my body, breathing through the contractions, and just kind of going inward without having to worry about the external environment, and having her kind of take care of a lot of that was extremely helpful, on top of the educational resources that she provided and everything leading up to the birth. And also making sure that your birth partner is on board with your plan and that they're supportive, and that you guys have had conversations about how they can best help you through this process. I hope you found this helpful. Make sure to check out the next video where I'll be covering how I prepared for this birth, the mental prep, how I chose my care team, what I did differently, and ultimately why I decided to switch from the hospital to the birth center when I was 30 weeks pregnant. Thanks for watching.